So just to introduce you to everybody that's online, if people are not familiar with Sue's work, Sue is a principal lecturer in learning, teaching and assessment, and a lead in computing in learning and teaching and assessment in Sheffield Hallam University. So in addition to teaching at undergraduate and postgraduate level, she has been involved in lots of interesting teaching, learning and assessment and social media projects in higher education. And in 2017, she was awarded a National Teaching Fellowship, and she's also a fellow and executive committee member of the Education Development Association. So thanks very much, Sue, and I'm really looking forward to your talk this morning. Are you okay to take over?
I'm fine, thank you very much.
It disappeared for a second. Thanks, Sue.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. It's an absolute pleasure. And yes, I am sad that I didn't manage to get to Galway, because it is something that I really want to do. So fingers crossed, third time lucky, maybe we can come visit next year, but we'll see. So the talk today is going to focus on some storytelling. I'm going to share some stories of my own. And this is going to be from a perspective as both a teacher, an educational developer, but also as a student myself. I've recently started, more for me, in January, a PhD. So that's been challenging, but it's actually been useful in the sense that, you know, I have developed an even deeper empathy with my students, because once you step into the shoes of being a student, you know, the worries come back, you know, and it takes you back years, but you really understand how your own students feel. And then I'm going to share a framework that I co-created with Andrew Middleton back in 2015, just as a lens really to talk about some of the things that I've done that I think have helped my students and might be useful for you to learn about. So I don't need to remind you that we've all been pushed to online learning, a little bit of back into the classroom. We've even experimented with hybrid teaching. So the students that were poorly with COVID could still engage with learning when we were in the classroom, and then we were back online. And you'd think after a year we'd be pretty good at this. And I have to say this morning, I'm not used to Microsoft Teams. It's something that we've only just recently started to look at my university. We've used Zoom and Blackboard to collaborate. And, you know, you try something different and it still makes you a little bit nervous. And I think, you know, we have to remember that both for our students and colleagues that, you know, we need to think about providing empathy, because we don't know what they're nervous about, you know, and being able to talk about it a little bit. And even I've found that it's helped me to joke with the students, you know, I've forgotten where that button is again, to, you know, find the whiteboard on Blackboard, you know, you've had a busy morning or something, you know, but sort of making little light of it can actually help. You know, and who knew these were going to be the sort of the most used statements of the year, you know, particularly in meetings. You know, do you want to Zoom is almost like, do you want to, you know, you go and Google something when we know there's more places to search. It's become a phrase. And, you know, can you hear me? Oh no, you're muted, all of these kinds of things. I'm sure you've experienced, and people freezing. You know, Wi-Fi in my home is pretty good most of the time, but you know, you can guarantee when you're doing a class something will happen. You know, there's multiple people in the house. You know, it can affect your connectivity and all sorts of things going on. And there's lots of worries and concerns that, you know, my students have shared with me, and of course colleagues as well, you know, and students particularly saying that they kind of come into the room if you're teaching, and you think, oh, they've come in and they've bobbed back out again, and it's almost they don't want to be the first one there, because, you know, you are at the front desk at the, you know, at front of the class, aren't you, if you're the only person. So that can make them feel uncomfortable. Forgetting to mute, there's been certainly concerns about that, where conversations have taken place when they shouldn't have done. You know, and it is something that we've had to look at with our students and sort of revisit, as we did with email, you know, sort of the netiquette kind of rules, really looking at, you know, so what is appropriate online. And of course, the classic one is not knowing where to escape from the room or stop sharing your screen. And I've stumbled many a time and probably will still stumble, but you know, hey, nobody's going to die because of it. And I think, you know, because we've all had to grasp all these new things together at the same time. I'm granted that there are people that are more experienced that have taught distance learning and feel confident, you know, and they've been really helpful colleagues to share on their experience. It has to some degree helped us because, you know, at some point somebody's going to do that, no matter how experienced you feel that they are. So you're not alone in that respect. I think what's shocked us at the early times of using Zoom in particular, and it may have happened in other areas, in other learning spaces, but this concept of Zoom bombing, where a stranger's managed to come into the room, and there's been some dreadful stories that have been very disturbing to both staff and students, where, you know, they've been very inappropriate and quite aggressive. But fortunately, you know, the technology people have got onto this, and, you know, more guidance has come out, you know, making sure that we don't share links publicly. You know, it all seems quite obvious now, but in the early days, these were really quite a concern. You know, people weren't, you know, sort of familiar with how to set up meetings to make sure there was a password and waiting room and whatever the situation is. So, you know, we've learnt an awful lot, and, you know, I think we should be proud of that, and, you know, remind each other, you know, that we've come a long way, and yes, we might still have quite a bit to learn, but we've made some enormous steps. And of course, there's always the humour that comes into it. Although I did feel sorry for this lady who'd somehow managed to turn herself into a potato in a meeting. But you know, I'm sure they had a laugh between themselves afterwards. You know, it was one of those things. It's some filters that you can put on in Zoom, as I understand. And there's been all sorts of memes about, you know, how people feel, you know, and the reasons why people have got video on or off. Quite honestly, a lot of colleagues have said, or in fact students have said, you know, the very fact that they haven't had the haircut, you know, they didn't want to put on their cameras. But the memes that have come out, you know, we can, as human beings, quite often find sort of laughter in situations that we find difficult, and that can help ease things. And if we think about, you know, all of the things that we've started to do and develop, and sharing ideas is really, really important. And one of the things that I find very helpful through social media is the network of educators who are openly sharing things through Twitter, through their blogs, maybe short how-to guides using YouTube or Vimeo. Doesn't really matter where the space is. There are multiple spaces that people use and have learnt a lot from. So those interactive things that you can do with online learning, you know, to actually engage your students, have been really beneficial. But things aren't necessarily that straightforward, and what I want to do is share a number of stories from both the tutor perspective and the student perspective. So I'm going to read some of these out. So, a tutor story. When you go into the teaching session and you're confronted with a screen of black rectangles because no one will come on camera, and they won't even have profile pictures on. And despite the fact that you might have emailed them beforehand to say, please enter the room and have your webcam switched on, it makes for a much more interactive and engaging experience for everyone in the room and myself. You just have a wall of black triangles and you ask them, why don't you come on camera? But they won't. You're talking to just a black screen, and it's a really, really hard experience. It's a struggle to get the students engaged. You can ask a question and it's just silence. And you find yourself having to pick on a name and say, so what do you think? And having spoken to students, as an academic advisor, I have one-to-ones with my first year. It's been interesting to see things from their perspective, and I think this is really important to understand and to talk to our students and to ask them why, if there's a situation that you don't understand. So some of the answers about having the camera on or off. A student said, I'm embarrassed about what others will think of my accommodation. Another said, my sister's in the same room and she hasn't put on a hijab. I can't turn on my camera. She can't be seen. Another student said, I'm praying I won't be picked on to answer questions. It makes me so anxious. And she told me about her mental health issues. Another tutor story. It seems that every week, just at the point where I ask the students to undertake an activity on the whiteboard or join a breakout room for a discussion, some sort of activity, the same students leave. Where am I going wrong? And from the student's perspective, I've discovered that, my house has really unreliable internet connection. My laptop's very old and keeps failing. I tried to join the class using my phone, but then my data allowance has run out, so I couldn't join. I'm sharing the Wi-Fi with my siblings who are homeschooling and my parents who are also working from home. It's really hard to get a good connection. So you can see that there's lots of different stories which, you may or may not be aware of. I think what's really interesting is having those conversations with students, and if you can find out, what the issue is, then you can go some ways to make things right. The number of students that are actually engaging with learning, and particularly in the early days, via the mobile phone was quite astonishing. And my university and many have put in provisions and funding for students to apply for laptops and other technology, webcams, and that has gone some way to help students. But we know that despite sending out numerous emails and signposting what's available for students, it doesn't mean to say that every student has actually grasped this, so that they've continued to struggle. And sadly, some students have just dropped out. It's just been too much for them. You might be familiar with the Educore's Ellie 7 Things You Should Know About series. There's actually about 170 resources now, and they're very useful case studies that present either a digital situation or a digital tool, and they present a scenario and then they talk about what it is, how does it work, who's doing it, why is it significant, what are the downsides, where is it going, and what the implications are for learning and teaching. You might not be surprised that the most recent additions are 7 things you should know about mental health and 7 things you should know about the digital divide. The digital divide scenario, I've kind of given you some examples from my own students. And it's quite apparent that high-speed internet is more common in urban and suburban areas than in rural parts of the country. And within the Ellie Guide for this particular example, you know, it talks there about the fact that students have had to rely on the smartphones. And, you know, there have been difficulties with Wi-Fi and various other things. You know, that digital divide is still very much there. The second scenario is the mental health scenario, and this is a story, and I'll just briefly give you it. I won't read it all out, but it's interesting to consider. And it's about a very strong student. He was straight A's through school, came to university, was doing really well. He was president of the student tennis club, and really enjoyed the sport. When we went into,
I've written it there. The
when we
opportunity
went
cost
into
of resources, isn't it?
When we went into lockdown, he really struggled. He found that depression started to kick in. He wasn't able to socialise. He started drinking. He'd had an injury and was taking medication. So a culmination of lots of different things ended up meaning that he was disengaging with his learning. Things were just too difficult. But it was a chance email that he managed to capture and glance that actually led to some support available. And it said, feeling anxious, got the pandemic blues, it's not just you. And that was a trigger for him to actually have a look at that information. And what he found was that there was an app and there was a podcast and there was various different information that he could digest slowly. And whilst that took some time to actually engage with, he eventually did start to talk to his friends again, who then confessed that they were also feeling similar anxieties. And, you know, that being able to talk about your feelings is really important. And, you know, sort of certainly through my academic advisor meetings, you know, trying to coax out what the problems are with the students is very important. That doesn't mean to say that you need to be the one that's going to be responsible, because there are people that are specialists that can help with mental health issues or any other kind of issues. But, you know, you can be the trusted person that they might talk to first. And that's the point where you can then signpost the support that is available. So there's some examples, and you may have examples of your own. So the next thing that I want to have a look at is the social media for learning framework that I mentioned. And I'm going to use this to just explain what it is. Andrew and I sort of developed more of a set of principles, if you like, really. And we've used these printed on cards in workshops in previous years, just to kind of stimulate conversation with colleagues. And that's been quite an interesting activity to do. So there are 7 principles that I'm going to have a look at, and we've actually written a chapter about these in Smart Learning, which is an edited book that Andrew wrote, which you might find useful to have a look at as well. So the first one is socially inclusive. And what this really wants us to think about is how we can create communities of practice, both with our peers, colleagues, but also with our students. You know, that fostering a sense of belonging has been quite difficult. You know, students have told me that, you know, because they haven't had the cameras on, you know, they've been in breakout rooms, and then when we actually did have some time in the classroom, they didn't know who those peers were, because, you know, they'd not met previously. So, you know, we're having to find different ways where we can find to help students feel connected, you know, and partially that's, you know, creating activities, but, you know, providing space, I think, within your teaching time to have some general chit chat. And sometimes it takes a little bit to get going, and you may only have a few students doing that, but don't forget the others are listening. They, just because they don't engage with that chit chat doesn't mean to say that they're not benefiting from the chit chat. So that's something to think about. And it made me sort of draw back onto the work of Phil Race, who talks about learning incomes, and this is the importance of actually getting to know what the students have already done, what their fears are, and what they're actually very good at is important. And in his most recent edition, I think it's the 4th edition of the lecturers toolkit, you can see this model here. So looking at the unconscious and conscious competence and incompetence, you know, it's important to identify. Sometimes the students are really gained experience from part-time jobs, from traveling, and they say, well, I've only just done this, you know, and they kind of pass it off as something that's not really important. And yet once you get them talking, it is, and these are useful things that they can sort of put onto their CV. So some of the activities that I've looked at pre-COVID and during COVID is asking my first year students to create about me videos. They actually have a Pebble Pad portfolio where they collate a lot of different things within that, including numerous CVs as they start to develop those, and also reflective blog posts. But the About Me video is literally a very short. They've got the choice to speak to camera, which they don't like, or they can just do a voiceover PowerPoint. And I say, try and give it a go talking to your camera. And the reason that I'm asking you to do this is because when you do apply for placements, because teaching and computing, a lot of the students would like to have a placement. It's a little bit more challenging recently, but these interviews quite often take place online now. So being able to see yourself speak and have a recording is actually a very useful thing to reflect on, hard as it might be to play back, as I know myself. But what I found particularly interesting was the stories that came out from the students. And as I say, they were only literally 1 or 2 minutes long, but it was just a little insight to getting to know my students, who some of them I'd never met face to face, obviously at the beginning of this year because of COVID. The other thing I managed to do before we went back into lockdown, for those that could come into the classroom, was utilise Lego Serious Play. And I use this to get the students to build models about what the reason they chose to come to university and what their aspirations are whilst they're here at university. And the idea of using the Lego to build models, if you're not familiar with Lego Serious Play, is really just a focus to talk to. And again, the stories that came out are much richer than they would be if you sort of said, one at a time, I want you to tell me your story. The reflective blog posts, the students over the year have to write 10 posts on different skills that they've got, or they feel that they've yet to develop further. And again, these are really interesting to read. I've learnt a lot about the students and what they've done in their home life, part-time work, volunteering, or indeed what they're experiencing through their course. So the idea with the reflective blog posts is that A, they get used to reflective writing, and I explain that when you go into the workplace, you know, it differs in in different organisations, but there'll be some sort of appraisal, professional development review, where you need to reflect on what you've done during the year. So learning how to reflect is a really useful skill. So the students write the first post, and I keep a Google Doc of marks, and I give them some feedback on that post, because sometimes the students are quite descriptive. We do spend time in class talking about the Gibbs cycle and how you can develop from just the description through to what could I have done differently, and what action plans do I need to put in place. So I give the students feedback. So whilst their initial posts might not get the higher marks, they gradually improve based on the feedback and the mark that they've got. So that's helpful. It does take a little bit more extra work, but I just find it so valuable. And then the other thing is the academic advisor one-to-ones. So I teach them on the first year module, which is employability and work-based learning, and I'm also their academic advisor. So I get to talk to them and find out how things are going across their 6 modules. And as I say, that's really helpful as well. So the second principle looks at life-wide and lifelong learning. And taking this from my own perspective, you know, developing an online presence, connecting with other educators across the globe has been absolutely incredibly useful. And, you know, I'm always learning through that informal learning. So just focusing on group chat as a way to connect. Twitter tends to be my go-to space for exchanging ideas and discussions with other colleagues. So that is really my CPD place, although, you know, I can learn things from other social media spaces as well. We found that LinkedIn has been quite useful for our students and alumni to share celebrations. So we've got a group for our course, and we invite students that are currently on the course and also those that have graduated. And that's really helpful. And we've actually brought alumni back in to talk to our students, you know, and they exchange information within that safe space. So it's a LinkedIn in group. Family tends to be Facebook Messenger, Zoom meetings, FaceTime, that sort of thing, you know, and that's been really important, you know, reaching out to family and friends, of course, to help you along. And then as a student myself, as a PhD student, we're actually learning through a VLE that's called Moodle, and I can't say as I'm a great fan of flat discussion boards. So one of the students actually decided to, well, made the suggestion, shall we have a group WhatsApp? And that has been a lifesaver. It's a private space where we can ask all of those awkward questions without being in the open, where tutors can see what we're asking, feeling awkward. You do really regress into being, you know, a nervous student when, you know, your assignments are due or the assignment comes out, and what the expectations are, you know, how you're coping with the readings and all of these different things. And I am aware that my students, you know, have created this, and it has to be their space. I don't think this is something that we can create for them, but I think we can suggest it. And in different disciplines, different spaces will be used. I know that in some areas, Suzanne Faulkner's at Strathclyde has done a lot of work on Snapchat, and for her students, they really like that and actually involve her within that particular group. They may have other Snapchat groups as well, of course. And then computing students tend to move towards Discord, which is another social networking tool. And I'm sure that there are many others. But it's good to have those private spaces, you know, and not everything. When you think of social media, you think about it being in the public domain and open. And of course, it can be, and information can be shared in that way. But also having these smaller spaces is useful. And the final one in the middle is Yammer, which I think it was possibly about 2009. It was introduced at Sheffield Hallam, and people engaged with it for a couple of years, and then it kind of went quiet. And in my department, I reinstated this as our social space. So we use this to share things about our garden. It's National Gardening Week this week, so I suggested that we share photographs of our gardens over the bank holiday when it gets a little bit warmer, because it's freezing cold here and it was hailing yesterday, and we get back into barbecue season. You know, last summer we enjoyed sharing recipes and things that we were eating outdoors and that sort of thing. And you know, it's just a nice other space where we can try and replicate to a small degree those corridor conversations, you know, or you know, when you pop into the kitchen to make a cup of tea, you know, those chance conversations where you pop your head round the door to see somebody. They're not there, but another colleague's there. You know, we've really missed that, and it is hard to replicate. But you know, these tools can go some way to doing that. The next principle was thinking about media neutral, and I think it's important to introduce students to lots of different ways that they can express themselves. And you know, it's been nice to get them to use through the development of smartphones, you know, the fact that you don't need fancy equipment. You know, you can take short videos, you can record audio. We've engaged a lot with tools like Padlet. Some people are quite keen on the whiteboard tool. I think it's called Miro. I never know whether it's Milo or Miro. And the example I want to show you next is an opportunity where my first year students in last year had external community-based projects where they worked with local community groups. There was the Royal Society for the Blind, the YMCA, there was an Alzheimer's cafe, there was an elderly residential home. And what the students did was create a workshop, and we went out to those spaces and they delivered that workshop with those community groups, which was an incredible experience for them. And even minority group, who 2 days before the actual day of the workshop that they were doing, had very little in their Google Drive. I like them to prepare their work in Google Drive so I can see where they're at. But they pulled it together, and you know, they came away. You could feel that they were really proud of themselves. Unfortunately, this year we weren't able to do that because of lockdown. But what I did do was get in touch with a local organisation. It's called Learn for Life, and they provide TESOL teaching, so teaching English as a second language, but they also teach students how to use computers. Now, these students are made up of local residents. They could be refugees, asylum seekers, there's BAME communities, and as older people, there's a whole mix of people that can actually physically go into what in effect is a double-fronted shop in a very old, big terraced street, but they've converted that into classrooms. With the flip on to online, they've been teaching through Zoom. So we had a conversation, because obviously I had too many students for them to do that just with that one organisation. So what the students were tasked to do was to come up with some guidance on how to use Zoom on a mobile phone. And as one project, and then they could choose from either creating some learning resources on how to use the suite of Google Apps and how to stay safe online. So these are some examples of infographic posters that they created for Learn for Life, which we're passing on to that organisation. And the reason that they wanted us to look at this was because whilst there are perhaps 3 or 4 paid employees for that organisation, the majority of the tutors are volunteers, retired teachers, or people, you know, that are interested in just volunteering to help others learn. So that was a useful exercise, and you can see that the students have done this all slightly differently. You know, it's really interesting to see how they visualise that, and they've used either Canva or PictoChart, which are free versions of tools that you can create infographics. The next one is about being learner-centred, you know, and I think we've come a long way of allowing students to develop their skills through extracurricular activities and things that they're interested in, you know, whether it's volunteering. We have something called the Hallam Award, where students can reflect on their competencies and skills, and gain through that reflection a bronze, silver or gold award eventually. I wanted to touch on just briefly, and some of you might be familiar with this because I talked about it last year, was a group of students that changed over time because some graduated, some went on to placement, although still interacted remotely. Was a special interest group for social media for learning. And this came about after the first Social Media for Learning conference at Sheffield Hallam back in 2015. Students straight away said that they wanted to rename their group. They didn't like the name SIG, so they called themselves SMASH, which stands for Social Media for Academic Studies at Hallam, and they created their own logo and branding. But what I wanted to really kind of focus on here was what we created together. We looked at how social media might be used and developed a framework together, creating these 4 pillars over time. So looking at learning activities in and out of the classroom, how they can use social media to organise the learning, how they can collaborate with each other, how they can use social media to showcase the learning. So I think it's really important that they understand the value of their own digital online presence, you know, and that might be not immediate as first years, obviously, but, you know, over time there'll be things that they could actually share. And then thinking about all the different ways our wonderful services across the university are using social media to connect with students through social media, because email seems to be just so overloaded. You know, students quite frequently say they don't read everything. So they've sort of looked to use other channels, and they're evolving over time. But what was interesting with this extracurricular activity was it gave the students an opportunity to write blog posts. It gave them an opportunity to actually present this work at other conferences. And one group also contributed to writing a journal article. So these are nice extra things that they can put on their CV. And this is just one very small example of how students as partners can be beneficial. There are, I'm sure, lots of other examples across the university, and even you may be aware of. So they might be quite niche, but, you know, it's something different if the students want to get involved with it. The next one is cooperative, so getting the students to work together. And this is nothing new, group work. comes with its own problems year in, year out. There's always the groups that struggle, and what I've really enforced over recent years is starting off with getting the students to co-write together ground rules for group work, and then they have to revisit that in semester 2 to reflect on that group work. And this is where they would create a second video for their PebblePad portfolio, reflecting on how their group work went, because it can be tricky. Sometimes the members of the groups work really well, but other times, as I'm sure you well know, that they don't. So they need to be able to manage that, because it's no different in the workplace. As I always tell them, you can't pick the people that you work with ordinarily. So you need to develop negotiation skills and leadership skills, taking ownership of projects. And one of the things we do with my second years is we have applied live projects, and they actually work with local businesses to develop a digital marketing strategy. So they meet with the clients online, which, that in itself was a challenge for them, because in this meeting I said, you really do need to, if at all possible, have your camera on, and most did. And they talk to the client and find out what they actually want to develop in relation to their business marketing. And the students work together collaboratively to build that together. They research the business itself. They look at their competitors, their direct competitors or indirect competitors, and then they come up with a strategy and a plan. And the students have to co-write this, as I've said before, in a shared Google Doc is kind of my way to do it. I mean, there's other ways I'm sure you could try, but it's good that they can all see what they're doing, and also if needs be, I can see what they're doing. And then they come back and present a screencast executive summary of the report and get formative feedback from the business and myself. This gives the students an opportunity to then go away, take on board that feedback, polish up the screencast, and then obviously the expanded report, which has got the detail in. And this has been really helpful, because what I've found sometimes with assignments is that, feedback's really useful and it's great, but if feedback comes too late to do something about it, then, it's not so good. And because they're working with real organisations, they want to do the best that they possibly can. So that formative stage has been really quite beneficial. The next one is open and accessible, and there's lots of ways that we can be open in all of these different examples placed within these principles, and you can almost do a keynote just on open. So I'm not going to stay too long on this one, but I think it's good to be open to new ideas, and by that I think we can sort of look to our students to understand how we can improve our teaching. Providing an opportunity midway through the module before the formal module evaluation can be really helpful, and whether that's done as an anonymous Padlet, in the classroom you might have passed around some post-it notes, name something that's going well, name something that I could improve, and it's interesting getting that feedback, because there's no point sort of continuing with activities that aren't of value to the students. They're not helping them with the learning. So bringing your students into the development of how you're teaching, and indeed assessing can be very, very useful. And then the final one here is authentically situated. And, you know, this takes me back to my own development and how I've used social media to develop that. And you may or may not be aware of the weekly learning and teaching in higher education chat. So LTHE Chats was developed in 2014 by Christine Rancy and myself. And in short, if you're not familiar with it, it takes place every Wednesday evening at 8 o'clock. And a topic has been chosen to focus an hour-long conversation, prompted by 6 questions. So, not wanting to make assumptions, if you're not familiar with Twitter, if you search for the hashtag LTHE chat and look at the questions posted by the @LTHE chat, you can see the questions and the answers that the participants contribute. It's known to be fast and furious. It does take a little bit of getting used to, but I guarantee that every single time I take part, I come away having learned something new. On the 4th Wednesday of the month, we've actually got a partnership with Advanced HE. So there's the dual chat hashtags. So it's LTHE chat and Advanced HE chat, and they choose the focus of the conversations and the questions. And that was a really nice opportunity, because when they started doing a chat once a month, it seemed a shame that we couldn't sort of combine our mutual audiences that we'd grown. So it was really nice to develop that partnership with them. So just to give a little bit of information behind the scenes of the Learning and Teaching in Higher Education chat. Up to now, Chrissy and I have taken in turns each semester to lead a team of volunteers that help to run the chat. So we've taken that a little step further now and also have a mentor. So we choose a mentor, a volunteer mentor, and 2 volunteers to be part of the organising group that makes this happen. So lthechat.com is a WordPress blog. We bought the domain name for that, and that's where we'd put the blog post, a photograph of the guest who's going to be providing the context of the topic, and they'd write a little bit of information about themselves and links to any useful information, and they would also provide the 6 questions. So the organising team contacts the guests and gathers this information, and then on the night they will either post or schedule ahead of time the 6 questions, and the chat takes place. At the end of the chat, we gather the tweets using a tool called Wakelet. We originally started to use a tool called Storyfy, which you might be familiar with. Storyfy decided to go fully premium, so that was a choice we had to move away from. But fortunately, Wakelet are a really lovely team who helped us actually move over 100 Storyfies. So the Storyfy or the Wakelet is a collection of the tweets. You kind of grab all the tweets within a time space, and then they're presented in the form of almost like a blog. So you can see blocks of tweets. It's what we call the quick and dirty way in terms of, you know, we just put them in the order that they appear, bearing in mind that the people that are organising this are volunteers who all have full-time jobs and maybe study on the side. But the Wakelets are a nice way to bring those together, because during the conversations, people share a lot of useful links to either videos or papers, blog posts, you name it, so that it's nice to be able to go and revisit the Wakelet and find those snippets of information. And the link is then put into the blog post on the lthechat.com site. So if anybody's ever interested in either being a member of the organising team or contributing a blog, do please let me know. You can contact me through Twitter at SueBex or at s.beckingham@shu.ac.uk. It'd be great to have some contributions from yourselves. And just to finish off, this is a quote that kind of went viral in recent times, and the illustration by Barbara Kelly is on Damien's blog post. So I want to make sure that I'm not. I want to acknowledge those images there. But it's a really poignant quote that I think we need to remind ourselves of. We're not all in the same boat. We are all in the same storm. Some are on super yachts and some have just one oar. And I think it's really important to ask questions. Those days when you meet somebody and they seem grumpy and, very different. We don't necessarily want to pry into people's private business, but having that empathy to recognize signals that might indicate actually those individuals are not necessarily having a good time at the moment. And we've all experienced those wobbles, the ups and the downs. It has been a difficult year. I think being online, I've certainly been online. I've not been into the office since last year, followed by online meetings and then an online PhD. It does get quite hard, and we need to continue to express our feelings and let people know when we're struggling, and to reach out to people to make sure that they're all right. And that goes for our peers, our students, and our family and friends. And fingers crossed, we're moving on. I understand we've now moved from a pandemic to an endemic. Let's hope the end is in sight and we can revisit what will be the new normal, take the good that we've learned from the experiences online, because I think there's a lot that we can take away from it, but also enjoy that face-to-face time as and when we can. Thank you. And from here, if anybody's got any questions.
Thanks very much, Sue. Thank you. Can you see me now, or you still can't see anybody?
I'll just, I can see you now.
Yeah. Thanks very much. That was really interesting. I really like that illustration at the end. It sums up the year really very well. So there's a couple of questions coming through on the chat. I don't know, can you see the chat? But I'm going to I'll go through.
I can't see the chat now.
Oh, can you not? Okay. So we'll just start. I'll just start at the top here. There's Lucia Clunan. She's a lecturer in the School of Business. She just made an interesting comment about Flipgrid. Do you use Flipgrid actually, Sue? She has used it with her students as an app for the students to create their own About Me videos, which is a super idea.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And you know what? I haven't used it as yet, but Debbie Bath from Alt, she uses it quite a lot and has actually used it. More recently, she gets us to do it for development sessions that we've done together, but I've not actually used it with my students. So, what do the students feel about it?
I don't, Lucia, do you want to share your experience of that? If you want to turn on your mic, because I know you've used it as in the group, that it's presented in a grid format, so all the students can see each other. Lucia, I don't know if
I
she's...
think that, yeah, the
Oh,
students really like it, because I think they like it as well because they can download it to their own phones and then upload it. And as you say, they can share the videos. Everybody can see everybody else's on one grid, so that makes it you know, they feel the social connection with it, and that particularly with the first years, that they can, and particularly because we're online, that they can introduce themselves to each other and look at each other's profiles and that. Flipgrid,
That's idea. Yes, so the context is that they introduce themselves and say a bit about themselves.
Yeah, well, we use for first years, but we use it with third and fourth years for projects as well. We use it in marketing if they have to create a promotional video. They do it on that as well. But I think the great value of it is that we can share all the videos on one grid, and you know, the people can comment. We do peer assessment with it as well, where one would comment on the other's video and give, as you were saying, give feedback for them to improve it for the next version of it.
Very good. You're muted now, so.
I just muted the just at a most inappropriate moment. They're putting the lines back on the road. They've just resurfaced, so the line van, lorry, truck is just going past. So it was very noisy. Anyway, it's gone now.
Lucia, did you find students were resistant to do it at first?
No, they liked it. They actually, I think it was the fact that they could just download it to there was no going somewhere else for it. They're used to downloading the apps on their phone, so they just saw it, I think, as an extension of that.
Very good. Great. And thanks, Lucia. So the next one, there's a question or a comment up here. Bridie Kaloran, who looks after our careers office here in GMIT, she's a very interesting online careers module, employability module for students. So she just notes, tell me about your self story, something that she gets the students to do, which includes their education, their skills, their experience, and all of that. They don't particularly like doing this exercise, but what they produce is usually fantastic professional stories. Bridie, did you want to come in to say anything on that, or?
No, I suppose I'll definitely look at Flipgrid anyway. Thanks for that, Lucia. Yeah, no, it's something we get the students to do because it's such a good tool for them when they're engaging with employers, but I find that they are hesitant about it and they don't particularly like promoting themselves. But at the end of it, what they're amazed themselves in terms of what they produce, and when they look at all they've achieved to date, it really improves their self-confidence, which is fantastic, definitely when they're engaging with employers or looking for opportunities.
Great, thanks Bridie. Jenny has a question here. Jenny Ryan, she's a lecturer in science. She's asking about the academic advisor work. Jenny, did you want to come in there to add to that comment?
Yeah, thanks very much, Karina. No, it was just to say that we have some people here who do phenomenal work. You were talking about the academic advisor role, and I agree with you, it's so important. But I'm in the School of Science. I'm just thinking of our first year coordinator in the School of Science. He's coordinating, roughly 300 students, while teaching 16 contact hours. So the coordination and the support and the tying in with the students and working out what does work for them and what doesn't work for them during the pandemic, that's almost a full-time job in and of itself. And I'm just wondering if in your university, do you get a time allowance? Is there a recognition for that? Or is this something that you do off your own back?
No, we do. It's something that's been kind of trickled in over recent years, but then made policy for the university. So we got 1 hour per student each year, so it's one hour contact time for academic advising that you can sort of break up over the time. So the ideal world is that you would just be an academic advisor for about 15 or 20 students. In some areas there just isn't enough people to do that, and that they do have more tutees, but where it is manageable, it's very helpful because it allows you to get to know those students well. And the ideal scenario is you take those students all the way through from first year, second year and final year. But again, that model isn't always something that works. In my courses, we do it slightly different. So I look after half the cohorts, well, for one course, for first years, and then another colleague does the other half, and then somebody different for second and final years. But yeah, getting to know the students is the important bit. You know, where the situation is that they bring in an associate lecturer that doesn't know them, doesn't teach them. You know, that bonding doesn't happen in the same way. It takes time for students to open up, but it's an emotional experience at the same time, because, you know, the things that some of my students have been through, you know, and they've learnt to trust me and tell their story, you know, have been quite horrifying. But, you know, at least I can then help them to get the support that they need, you know, the counselling, the guidance.
Yeah, thanks. I think that aspect of it is enormously underrated when it comes to retention and it comes to students achieving their potential. So thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah. I think the other thing to add with it that I've learned and you know, is that, you know, students, I can put out and say, okay, we've got all these different slots in Google Calendar, choose the slot and we'll have a meeting. And there's always ones that don't, so you have to chivvy those students up. You know, there's no good saying, well, you know, if they don't reply, then that's their hard look out. They don't reply because there's something more underlying wrong, you know, and you know, it does keep chivvying them, changing the line in your email, you know, how are you, you know, so just trying to coax them to have a response, and you know, it does pay off. And I have to say, you know, I've got sort of tears in my eyes thinking that the students are just so grateful, because they needed that somebody to just get there. You know, and they've been worrying about things, and you know, sometimes they get themselves in that spiral. They've felt that they've got so far behind, and yet there's always a way that we can get around things, you know, and we've managed to retain students that I know that would have left.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Thanks, Jenny. So another question coming up there, Laura Hegarty, she's a lecturer in School of Business. She's a question around, do you think education will change, or has changed, or is it all going to change once we return to college, how we deliver our content for the modules? What's your feelings on the change, and what's going to be post-COVID? Or good question.
I think it's bound to change. You know, I think there's going to be more choices. You know, just going back to the academic advising, you know, there'll be a choice for students. You know, we can jump on a Zoom call. You know, that's become a thing now. Whereas, you know, before COVID, you know, the students would have been mortified to have a video call, when actually, you know, that's actually quite a quick thing to do. Let's talk through, rather than having sort of email tennis, you know, when you're going backwards and forwards and, you know, you're not really understanding what each other's saying. So that's one aspect. You know, I think the traditional lecture could change. It's something I moved away from a couple of years ago, really. I tend to have that 2-hour workshops, so I'll do a bit of talking. It's kind of active learning, and then there's, you know, the students are getting on with things and a bit more talking, rather than sort of trying to fill an hour lecture when, you know, the students are not always engaging with that. You know, they're either half asleep on the mobile phones, or you know, not being there. I'm not saying that all students do that, and but you know, the lecture is important. Sometimes it is to have that you know, that time, but also having these bite-sized chunks of information that are recorded that the students can revisit has been something that they have appreciated, you know, if so that they can replay those. And obviously the accessibility coming in, and tools like Panopto that have managed to, you know, sort of provide the captions that are needed. You know, there's all sorts of different considerations to think about. So I think it will continue to change. We've had a taste of what's possible, and that's given us confidence. And, you know, our wonderful technology enhanced learning teams, digital skills teams, are finally being, you know, truly appreciated, because, you know, they've just been incredible. You know, we'd have been in a really hard spot if they hadn't worked so hard to train us up and go over the same things over and over again, but also bringing in the innovation, you know, and sharing the stories. And I think that's the important thing to pull out now, not just, you know, we've used these different technologies, but what has really worked, what surprised you, what can you share with other people, and I'm sure that will come out in the week for you with the other presentations that are coming, you know, some fantastic stories.
Great, thanks, Sue. I'm glad you mentioned the digital technologists or learning technologists. It's so true. They've never been more valuable, and a spotlight is shining on digital teaching and learning technologists this year for sure. So let me see. Next question. We have Michael Carey, who's from Letterkenny IT. He's a lecturer in computing. He's actually one of our digital champions this year as well. You probably remember me telling you about the digital champions, Sue. We started last year. So Michael has a question. How do you decide on which tool to use? So they use Blackboard, Collaborate, Ultra. They're Blackboard House in Letterkenny IT, but they use Blackboard Ultra or MS Teams. How do you decide which one to use when collaborating with your students or running your online class? Any comments on that, or do you have a choice? I suppose you're using Zoom. Is it really primarily? Yeah.
Well, for me, it's Collaborate, Blackboard Collaborate. So we were given a choice as an institution to use either Collaborate or Zoom. And I started with Collaborate and stuck with it. Now, people have said that Blackboard Collaborate can be cause more issues, and sometimes they've had to move to a Zoom room for a class. But it's personal choice, and it's a tricky one really, because, you know, sometimes, or at least initially, the students get confused. You know, is there a Zoom link, or do we go to the Blackboard Collaborate room? You know, there's a learning room that I just have open. I can upload the slides. You know, I became familiar with that and more confident. And Zoom for me is Zoom meetings. It's my staff meeting space. Microsoft Teams, as I say, we've only just started to use that not for teaching, but to have team meetings. So we're at the very early stages. So, you know, who knows? I suspect there might be a shift towards Teams, but choice, it's down to the tutor. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Sue, and thanks, Michael, for that question. So we've Helen McConnell. I'm not sure it's Helen from Sligo or Letterkenny IT, but thanks, Helen, for your question. So, I'm from the
LYIT.
Hi, Helen.
How you doing?
I just see you're talking about Springboard and adults, teaching adults.
Yeah, I definitely found, like Sue's conversation there about the whole thing about empathy. I mean, I suppose I mainly teach adults, but I've just recently started teaching some Chinese students as well that are based in China. They would normally come over to the LYIT for a module. But especially with the adults, a lot of them are people that have lost their jobs through COVID, maybe mums who are looking to get back into the workforce. So, you know, very different. I mean, that last slide that you have there is very, you know, resonates very well with, I think, the adults, because there's so many people with different situations at home. You know, they're out of work, they're very short on money, you know, they're trying to do this course. You know, there's others that are there that have maybe 3 and 4 kids at home. They're trying to study on top of that, and maybe, you know, they are still, you know, there's some mums as well that are working part-time. They've got kids and they're trying to do this, you know, because they're trying to just progress in their careers. So yeah, empathy, I find, you know, you have to be you have to have such empathy for them, because everybody has a different situation, and they, you know, they really lack a lot of confidence in the digital world. You know, I find that as well. Maybe not having been brought up with computers, and maybe they're now entering into the digital area at this time in their lives, and, you know, that confidence, and they can do it, and there's a lot of little exercises, you know, that they can do. I mean, one of the things that I teach is that they can build their own website using WordPress, and at the start they were like, there's no way I could do a website, but, you know, they've all done it, and it's such a great achievement when they can do it. That's fantastic. Yeah, empathy is huge. Yeah. So thanks. It was a great talk, Sue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Helen. And then we have Suzanne. Good to hear you're experiencing, we're all experiencing similar stories, Sue, which is great to hear. I totally agree. The importance of one-to-one communication has been very important this year, and the students really appreciate it. So echoing what you're saying there, Sue. Trish O'Connell, who's she's a lecturer in maths in School of Science. She's just saying very fantastic approach. There's no substitute for genuine empathy, and students pick up on that. So good point, Trish. Kieran Egan. Kieran Egan, great talk, Sue. Lots of familiar issues raised, both big and small. And you've peeled back the visible frustrations to show how bigger concerns are often at play. So empathy is key. So thank you, Sue. So, and then we have just Laura coming back. It's good to get your perspective and insight. Is there anybody that has a question to ask that wants to take the mic? I have a couple of questions just before we finish up, but just to give others an opportunity. I don't see any raised hands. Jessica, you raised your hand, but I'd say you're telling us we've time.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
We have a coffee break anyway, so we're grand. What was I going to ask you, Sue? It was actually PebblePad. You mentioned PebblePad. Now, we've an interesting pilot going on this year in GMIT. We've various disciplines that are using PebblePad and looking at PebblePad as an assessment tool, as a work-based learning tool, as a student engagement, teaching and learning tool. And I just wondered, is it widely used in Sheffield Hallam, or was it specific to particular disciplines or programs?
Initially, it was specific areas. So the health courses had PebblePad, and they've run with that and found it really helpful for many years. Okay. And then education used it a little bit, and then it was something that my faculty said no, we can't afford to have that, and then the university re-looked at it and provided it across, you know, a full university license. But there's not a great deal of people that are using it. We're just about to embark actually on a piece of research to have a look at it to find out how it's being used across Hallam, so that'll be some interesting work to report back in future times. But I've certainly found it useful to think about how you can have a portfolio of scaffolded exercises so the students learn from the different things. So being able to reflect on their skills and then put those into star statements, which might then be used either in an interview situation or in their CVs, and to have their CVs within the portfolio as well is helpful. They also have an activity to create a LinkedIn profile, and sort of bringing all of these together, and it all culminates in a reflective report right at the end where they revisit these activities to see what they've learnt from them. So they actually make sense of it. It's taken some time to get to where we are. I'm not saying that it's perfect. It's something to sort of reflect on myself how we can develop it. But you can set up your PebblePad with as many columns as you like, so that there is actually a space for them to reflect on their action plan from the academic advisor meetings as well. So it's another space outside of the VLE, but it's their space. And I think what's valuable about PebblePad is the fact that the students can take it with them. Yeah. So they have this for life, whereas whatever they put on the VLE blackboard for us, once they've left, that's it, it's gone. It's all
yeah. I just lost you there, Sue.
Whereas PebblePad, they retain ownership. So,
Hello, is it my line or have I just lost Sue?
It's Sue.
Sue, I think.
I think I lost it. Sue, you're frozen. That's interesting with PebblePad. I don't. Could you hear me? Hello? we
No, I
have.
think she's frozen, I think.
She's frozen. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we as anyone who's on the call here, I don't know if Helen Craig or Joan O'Keefe is on the call, but they've been working with the medical science group and they've been having good success on using PebblePad. There's lots of other colleagues that are using it across the institute, so I'm sure we'll be. And Sharon Boyle, you're on the call. Sharon was one of the first, the early adapters. We followed you, Sharon, really, in our use of PebblePad.
Yeah, Karina, I mean, I just find, you know, once more people are adopting it, I think it'll be a great tool, just especially with the way things are at the moment, to help students build on their experiences throughout college, and then it helps them when they finish college, as Sue was saying there, they can bring it with them. And it gets people into the habit of reflecting upon their professional development then, you know. So I think it's a really good way to scaffold them through college and after.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder, did we lose Sue, Jessica?
I think.
Can you hear me?
Oh, you're back again.
I can hear you.
You could hear us talking, could you?
Yes, I could. Yeah. I could hear you, but yeah, obviously I'd frozen. Well, good job it happened at the end and not through the middle.
The other thing to note, we are going to finish up now, but I that Smash initiative is you mentioned that previously when you were here in GMIT last year on call, and I'd like to follow up on that again. It's come a long way since over a year. It's worked very well, even in the online space. So the Smash initiative.
It's not run this year. That was towards the end of last year.
We finished was the outputs from the end of last. Okay, yeah, but still, it's a wonderful initiative worth following up on. I shared the link in the chat. The other thing I wanted to note to colleagues, I just wanted to emphasize again that the Wednesday evening on Twitter, the chat, LT chat, HE chat. Yeah, HE chat. It is a fantastic forum. It's not every week now I join, Sue, but I was delighted when you asked me to do one before Christmas, and just oh my God, the engagement on Twitter, it's just fantastic. And they're colleagues from all over the higher education sector in Ireland and the UK and further afield. And they're all sharing, and it's a great forum to, I suppose, work through ideas in assessment, teaching, learning, and you name it. Every topic comes up. I'm sure they'll do e-portfolios. Wouldn't that be a good one to do one week to actually discuss?
It would, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Have you done e-portfolios recently, or has that come up?
No, we haven't actually for a while. So that would be a good one. So any volunteers, let me know.
I think, Sharon, we might get you involved in that one.
Yeah, that's fine.
And we have a couple of colleagues in science as well that have been active, and we have colleagues out in Letterfrack that are looking at PebblePad as a work-based learning platform as well. So we might talk to you about that. E-portfolios might be a nice topic. So listen, is there any other Jenny is coming. Oh, Jenny, you have a question. Jenny, we're looking at institute licenses for PebblePad. There's a work group that's established that's looking at PebblePad, and we're working with the IT services, computing services department, and how we might integrate it in GMIT. So I think watch this space. It's definitely a positive, I suppose, step that's happening in that space. So and Jenny, you're about to start a project under SAFL using e-portfolios for your physics program, isn't that right, Jenny?
Yeah, that's why my ears are perking up. Yeah,
and we have license for you anyways, but separate to that, we're trying to look at an institute system for PebblePad, and Sharon is in that group as well. So okay, so listen, any more questions? I don't see any more hands up. I don't think I see any more hands up. Let me just check. And we've all the chat. So I'd just like to thank you, Sue. Great start to the week.
Sure.
That gets us thinking. Lots of food for thought, or lots of messages presented this morning on such a wide range of topics. And it's interesting to see we're all in the same boat, you know, really. And a lot more to come in the next few months. See how we all get on in September. If we can have some sort of a hybrid type system, is that something you're looking at within your university? That there might be some people on site and some sessions online, or
we're not actually. No, they've said it, unless people felt that it went particularly well and it worked in their area, that wouldn't be something that we'd offer. So, you know, students could choose. The idea is that students will come back to university.
Yeah.
With, of course, the caveat that, you know, if the government says that we've got to have another lockdown, then, you know, we go back online. But it would be one or the other, is what decided. Yeah, there's lots of complexities. I think the high flex where the students have got the choice, you know, it takes a lot of management, I think, doesn't it? And you know, it's great if you've got a number of teaching assistants in the room, but, you know, if you've not, then, you know, I think it's tricky to manage. We did it when we had to, but I wouldn't sort of advocate it.
Okay, so listen, thanks very much.